Angie sat across from me, silently sipping her morning coffee. After 3 wonderfully passionate years, this morning's routine had become much of the norm for the past few weeks. Our romance seemed to have completely burned out over the past weeks. The distance had been an incredible challenge that eventually turned us into yet another statistic. I am sure that the thick wall of cynicism that I have built around me over the years is another big factor to the decay of this relationship, but to Angie's credit, she was still determined to help me through my issues. She was more than willing to listen to my morbid story, without judgment or reservations, even now in the eve of our relationship. You do seem to get reeled back all the time, just as you make peace with your surroundings, don't you? Angie looked over her coffee mug. A sorrowful expression covered her face like a well-worn mask. It's almost as if I am writing a book, and just when I am about to write the final chapters of the happily ever after, well, I tried not to place any blame on her. She was completely innocent of any wrongdoing. I knew she had tried to hang on to that love for as long as she could. She knew that I had done the same. But the distance was far too much a burden. I come along and add more shit to your plate. She immediately absorbed the blame for our drifting apart. I moved to hold her hand and comfort her as best as I could, but she recoiled as if my hand had become a snake waiting to strike. No, Dee, please, no. Not everything can be your fault, baby. She looked at me, unspent tears filling her eyes. Let me be the one at fault here, please. There is no one at fault, Angie, I replied. We just drifted apart. You have given me no reason to hate you, or even to dishonor your name. Slowly, I reached for the coffee mug. The black elixir was welcoming as always. We both knew this was a huge possibility. You have your career to worry about, and I am still living the life of a nomad. I absolutely loved every second we spent together, mio amore, but our own lives have been tugging us apart since the day we met. Do you think we should spend this last weekend together? Her voice was dangerously close to breaking into a wail. She hung her head as if she was standing before a judge that would pass sentence on her. I would like that very much, I replied. I was still unsure if I was doing the right thing. Things like instinct and gut have become so twisted in my mind that I was no longer sure as to what moral compass I was following. I hadn't slept well the previous nights, but the realization that I was returning to a life of blood and bullets kept me more than awake. Not only had any exhaustion left my body the closer I got to my dear home, but I began to shake with anticipation. This was the way the world accepted me. This was the environment where I felt more at home. I had tried to live a good life. I honestly gave it my best effort to walk away from all the bloodshed and violence of my youth. Lady Death plays a tune that is hard for my blood to resist for very long. Amidst the chaos that was my life, I surveyed the damage that had swallowed what remained of my family. My brother Angel was in prison for gun charges. He would be facing federal time for sure, and his absence would create a huge vacuum of power not just within the family, but in the city itself. My dear mother, who at one point in my life had convinced me to forgive the cheating bitch that would become my wife, showed her own immoral ways by revealing that my eldest brother, the most honest of us all, was only my half-brother. That set of news nearly devastated my father. I had left an empty home and a discarded job in Arizona, only to be headed into the valley of death with a smile and an invitation from an old acquaintance, Officer Sandoval. The most troubling of all was her. Cece, who is it? The loud voice answered the triple doorbell ring that I had created. It was a habit from my childhood days. Press the bell 3 times for no particular reason. God damn it, hold on, the voice continued. Officer Sandoval. I greeted the man as he opened the door. He was still partially dressed in his work uniform, save for the blouse that he had long discarded. The uniform pants and stained undershirt revealed the long hours that this man had been subjected to in his job. Long hiring delays and stringent hiring practices made his line of work one of the most difficult to enter. Holding up the case of beer, I continued, just seeing if you're up for a few drinks. D. He eagerly shook my hand. I was expecting you a few days ago, but I can't imagine that you have been busy dealing with your family affairs. He gestured for me to enter the home and guided me into his kitchen. You can put the beer in the fridge. You still a heavy smoker? I nodded as I placed the beers in the fridge and removed 2 bottles. All right, let's go out back and chat there. You have a beautiful home, Officer Sandoval, I said, speaking the complete truth. His home was located just outside the suburbs of the city, just far enough to avoid the smells of the city. The smog and body odor that permeated every centimeter. Even the crude smell of oil and burning garbage seemed to avoid the area. The sounds of traffic just hanging in the background and drowned by the chirping of birds and the laughter of children. Nothing much to it, D, he cheerfully replied. I knew that I wanted to remain here and do my part to uphold the community. I may not have an adventurous life, but this is the life that I was destined to live. You know? No, I replied as I took a sip of the cold Pacifico. I honestly can tell you I don't know what you mean. All my adult life, I have spent working for the government in some capacity to make up for my earliest mistakes in life. Hell, you knew me in the wild, reckless days of my youth. Truth be told, the reason I am able to move from one place to another so quickly is because I have nothing holding me back in any particular place. I couldn't imagine that type of life, Sandoval replied sorrowfully. So tell me, is your brother's arrest the only reason why you have decided to return home? I wanted to check up on him, I replied, but I also had other family business to address. You know how it is, being away for so long can have some unseen complications. I can imagine, Sandoval replied as he took a drink from his own beer. Listen, I'm really sorry about your brother. I can't imagine your family is having a good time with that situation. Well, my parents are having difficulties with the situation, but they'll get through it, I'm sure, I replied. Paranoia was beginning to make an appearance. I looked closely at this man. Suspicion was beginning to take a hold of me. There was something odd about his questions, but I chose to ignore them for the time being. Your family has always had a great reputation to uphold in this community, he continued. Such a thing would have come as a shock, I'm sure. His blank stare peered into my own eyes. But I am sure that you will do your best to help your family out. Before I could reply, another voice interrupted our chat. I'm home, honey, the feminine voice said. Oh, I didn't realize you had company, baby. Ma'am, I said, immediately standing up from my chair. She was an older woman. From her looks, she was nearing her older years, but somehow she remained superbly gorgeous, attractive. Truly, she was the definition of women aging like fine wine. In her older years, she became more and more desirable. Baby, Sandoval immediately replied, don't worry about it. Just an old friend stopped by for a minute for some drinks and small talk. He moved to embrace his wife. Her sudden surprise convinced me that this was not his usual response to her arrival. I hope I am not interrupting, she replied, looking at my face, trying to figure out where she had seen me before. The years had changed my features. I had taken to growing a beard and shaving my head in order to hide many of my features, and the way I spoke now was vastly different from how I would have spoken many years before. Not at all, ma'am, I interrupted Sandoval. Please join us. We aren't speaking of anything particularly important, and I am sure you are having a difficult time trying to figure out who I am. I am sorry for being so rude, she replied, blushing a little, but you do seem very familiar. Where have we met before? Sweetheart, Sandoval said, this is Dee. No, her surprise could not be hidden. Her hand reached to cove her mouth. A slight step backwards and a quickening of her breath revealed her complete shock at the revelation. Not the same. I am afraid so, ma'am, I replied, sheepishly smiling as I continued. But I assure you, I have done a lot of growing up since whatever time you seem to remember me by. It has been many years since I have returned to this city. Sweetheart, Sandoval interrupted. Dee here has just come back after many years overseas. He bled for this country, left a young hoodlum, and came back a true hero. He almost beamed with pride as he finished his speech. He turned out to be a damned good man. That explains a lot of the changes I see, she said as she took a seat beside me. But I see some things don't change. Still a bachelor? There is something about military men being unable to hang on to a woman. Well, I replied, a small smile on my face. I was married once upon a time, ma'am, but things— I took a swallow of my beer. Well, what I could give her was not enough, it seems. I am sorry to hear that, Dee. Her embarrassment was clear. Where is she now? I am sure she is busy raising the child she had while being married to me with her new husband, I replied. The years had taken the malice out of my voice as I talked about this subject. I was happy for Anne, though I had not heard or spoken to her in years. I truly hoped that she was happy in her life as best as she could. Oh my God, she continued. She had covered her mouth with her hand in shock. I am so very sorry, Dee. Babe, Sandoval interrupted. Would you give us a few minutes while we catch up? Sure, she replied, happy for the opportunity to abandon the embarrassing conversation. I need to get the day off me. I'll leave you boys to your talk. She leaned over and kissed her husband as she walked into the house. I could not help but gaze upon her body. Like I said, even with her older days, her beauty had not faded one bit. She had a wonderfully fit body. Even her posterior showed the years of gym time that had been well invested. I'm sorry about that, Dee. Sandoval interrupted the daydream I was shamefully enjoying. She often says whatever is on her mind without much filtering. No need to apologize. I dismissed his apology with my hand. There was no way she would have known about my life. I do understand. I am at an age where my peers are already years into their family lives. Truth be told, I envy some of them. I stood up and stretched my aching back. The loud popping noise reminded me of the many injuries I had accumulated over the years. If things had been different, I'm sure that by now I would still be a happily married man with a few rugrats running around. I can't believe what I am hearing, Sandoval said. You actually regret the way your life turned out to be? All those crazy adventures you've had? He picked up his bottle tentatively. He had said far more than he had intended. His hesitation made everything clear to me at that moment. Not at all, Officer Sandoval, I said, slowly holding up my cell phone. I found the app that I needed with ease. I always kept the apps on my phone in alphabetical order. After activating it, I moved the phone towards Sandoval, who had maintained his silent stare as I moved. He thought I was trying to show him something in my phone. The fool leaned closer to my phone. The steady beeping from the phone brought a blanket of sadness over me. Of all the things I have done, I can at least say that I never betrayed those I held dear. What? I held up a single finger in order to silence him. Then I moved my hand and pointed at his chest. Realization washed over him. He at least had the decency to hang his head in shame as he realized that he had been discovered. Should I expect your law enforcement buddies to rush into this house at any moment? Or did you not get anything that could be used against me, officer? Contempt and anger dripped with each syllable. The sound of my phone case closing snapped him out of the cloud of depression that hung about his head. His hand moved toward his empty hip while I shook my head. I see. Well, guess you were just trying to build the case for, who dare I ask? FBI, he replied, his hand moving back to the table as more shame washed over him. No one is going to be rushing into the house. They approached me a while back, when your brother was brought in. Our history made them think that we might have shared some sort of connection, and they asked me if I knew anything regarding your brother's operation. They moved him out of county and placed him in another facility after your visit. Did you have anything to do with that? No, he quickly replied. I swear. After your visit, they showed up again, and I told them that you were back in town. They asked me if I would be meeting you, and then they told me that they would need to get some information from you. I am a law enforcement agent. When they asked me for my cooperation, there was no way I could say no. We had a meeting with a few people, agents from various agencies, and they knew that with your training, it would be nearly impossible to have anyone tail you, not to mention tapping your phone or blackmailing you in any way. He took a long drink from his beer before continuing. They asked me if I felt that you posed any danger to me or my family. When I told them no, they asked me to wear a wire and try to get you to say something that could give them an insight into your family operations. There has been a rise of violence in this area over the past years, and with your brother's arrest, it seems like it will only get far worse. So, yeah, I betrayed your confidence, but I did it for the right reasons. This is my community. The people that are being killed in my streets are my friends and acquaintances. I looked beyond him. What he said made perfect sense. This man whose life I had saved long ago just sold me out over a promise for better days ahead. A noble dream, but still nothing more than a dream. These past years have shown me how dangerous it can be to be a dreamer in a world of reality. Why are so many federal agencies interested in my brother's arrest? I don't know any more than what I told you, he replied. The circumstances behind your brother's arrest are fishy. He has always been a very intelligent man. The case against him is so perfect that it is very suspicious to all involved. With the large amount of weapons, trafficking charges are immediately mounting against him that on its own brought in the feds. We all know that your family is not the most reputable one, but we all know that you guys look out for the community. The wars here are getting worse, and that also has brought even more Fed attention. So, you were supposed to get me to confess. What exactly? The anger in my voice betrayed the usual control that I maintained. This situation had affected me far more than I initially thought. Nothing, he pleaded. I was just supposed to get information on what your family is planning, or what you might know about your brother's arrest. Tell your FBI buddies that it would be a good choice to stay out of my way, I replied. I am here to look after my family and nothing more. I have faithfully served my country, bled and cried for the flag, and have sacrificed more than my share to keep the wheels of the machine moving. I looked at Sandoval so that his microphone would clearly pick up my next statement, but if I feel even an unordinary set of eyes on me, I will give them a reason to look into my comings and goings with a microscope. I will bring them a war so great that it would make the current violence blush like a nun in a nudist colony. I grabbed my belongings and moved toward the door. The female form that stood there, holding 3 cold beers in her hand, made me stop for a second. Honey, Sandoval tried to stand, but her voice froze him in place. What did you do? She looked at him with a strange combination of pain and humiliation. D, I'm so sorry. Please? She looked at me as I reached for the 3 bottles. Enjoy the rest of your evening, ma'am, I said as I walked past her. I'm sure you'll understand if we don't see each other again. It truly was a pleasure to have met you. As I closed their front door behind me, I could hear her screams as she scolded her husband. Sandoval had been right. Things had changed. I placed the 3 bottles in the seat beside me as I turned over the well-maintained engine of my father's truck. The rumble of the engine was not overtly exaggerated, but it did reveal the power under that hood. The drive to my next destination was not long, but with my mind weighted down by the latest revelations, it seemed long and, more importantly, lonely. I had left few friends behind in this town, and already I was beginning to lose those few. I kept my eyes on the rear-view mirror, looking for any signs of vehicles that may be following me. Just as I had made certain that no one was following me, the familiar gate appeared. The house had been built by my great-grandfather once he had established the family business. Even for today's standards, it would be considered eccentric. It was a 2-story house built with a larger bottom floor, almost like a castle. The 6 bedrooms were all located in the 2nd floor. The bottom floor held a large number of offices and a family room where most family meetings were held. As technology advanced, the upgrades to the house kept it modern. A 10-foot rock wall surrounded the house with 2 gates providing access into the property. Cameras and roving guards maintained security. We aren't accepting business at this moment, the young man that was manning the main gate said as I pulled the truck up to the guard shack. So turn around and go back the way you came from. I'm not here selling anything, I replied. Irritation was quickly taking over the previous emotions I had felt. Looking over the newspaper that absorbed his full attention, the young man continued. What are you, a reporter? He stood up and walked toward the driver's side window. The young fool did not even take time to see if I was holding any weapons before he approached the window. Or a cop. Do I look like a cop? You see a notepad in my hands? Then what do you want? He placed his hand on the butt of the weapon holstered on his right hip. Small 9mm Beretta that rested there gave him a sense of bravery. Just open the gate, I replied as I looked at the young punk. His hand gripped the weapon in preparation to unholster it. I put the truck on park and removed my foot from the brake just as he leveled his weapon. Do you know where you are at, you dumb shit? He took a step closer to the window, finger on the trigger well and an unsteady base. I almost smiled at how stupid he was. The training for the guards had seriously deteriorated. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands, keeping my breathing steady as he neared the window. As soon as his weapon crossed the window of the truck, I made my move. With my right hand, I pinned his weapon hand against the roof of the truck. Applying the right amount of pressure on his wrist made his hand release the weapon. Before his mind registered the attack, my left hand reached for the door handle, and using my left leg, I opened it violently. The sound of his nose breaking with the impact of the door was only interrupted by the loud scream. A second strike from the door silenced that as well. A third strike and his eyes rolled to the back of his head as darkness took him. I moved to the shack and pressed the button to open the gate, while dropping the magazine and clearing the chamber of the weapon he had so carelessly lost. I managed to pull the truck past the gate just before it closed, and I had parked the vehicle before anyone took notice of me. I took the 3 bottles from the seat and stood outside of the vehicle. Leaning on the bed of the truck, I opened the first beer while I waited for the welcome committee. 2 minutes, I said as the 6 well-armed men approached, all weapons drawn and leveled at me. They moved out of sync, completely unorganized, but at least they moved toward the same person at least. I told them as much. You need to put your hands up, a-hole, one of the men said. This was the only one that had the perfect base and a good shooter's stance. Real slow. And tell me what kind of death wish you have to come in here the way you did. I'm here to see your boss, I replied as I sipped the beer in my hand. It was nearly empty. I slowly finished the last of the liquid in the bottle before tossing it casually on the bed of the truck. Moving slowly, I reached into my pocket and drew the pack of cigarettes out while I kept my eyes on the single man that seemed to have some training. I don't remember your name on the appointment book, he sneered. Don't remember any of you a-holes asking for my name, I smiled. Popped the cap off the second beer and took a long and satisfying drag from the bottle. The beer was losing its refreshing coolness with the heat of the day. After a loud burp, I took another long sip, nearly finishing the second beer. I gotta give it to you, the same man continued. You got guts. What do you want? I need to see your boss, I answered. The tone of my voice meant to deliver nothing more than complete coolness in the situation. Now, you are either gonna walk with me inside, I continued, or I am gonna sit here, finish my last beer, and then I'll be walking in by myself. I pulled my coat to the side so that they could see the sidearm resting there, my ever-present .40 Smith & Wesson. A few bullets lighter, but alone nonetheless. Your move, gentlemen. There is 6 of us, one of the men said before being interrupted by the only one that actually impressed me. Without muttering a word or making a single motion, he silently ordered the man that had tried to sound tough to talk to someone on the radio. Good choice. I chuckled as I tossed the second empty bottle in the bed of the truck and reached for the third one. Well, ain't no use in wasting a perfectly good beer, wouldn't you say? I tipped the bottle in his direction, just as the second man once again interrupted. He is still entertaining his guest, the man replied sheepishly. Well then, I laughed. Perfect timing, wouldn't you say? I handed my half-drunk beer to the radio man as I buttoned my coat. Now, shall we? I moved past the surprised men toward the large door. A few years before, the family had placed a security panel that was code-protected in order to prevent unauthorized entry into this particular section of the house. As I punched the code in, the surprise of the men that were following me did not go unnoticed. Some things never change, I said as the lock moved out of place and the door slowly opened. Who are you? The first man said as I moved into the house. The layout of the living room had not changed in the last years. Even the small stains on the walls from the children drawing almost made it feel like a home. I smiled at him, a grin that I am sure that made me look like a schoolchild. I pointed at the hall just past the main stairs. This way, I'm guessing? I knew the room that was at the end of the hall. I had sat there many times alongside my brother as we listened to my uncle give us lessons on the family business. As I continued walking, they all followed. I was looking at the familiar pictures that hung on those walls, all from our family as we all grew up. Generations smiled at us as we walked down the hall. Before we reached the door, I could hear the arduous entertainment that prevented my cousin from opening the door to a visitor. Maybe we should, the radio man said. Using the weight of my body and the strength of my legs accumulated over the years in countless battlefields, I easily kicked the door open. The cracking would prevented him from finishing his statement, but it did not seem to have been loud enough to stop the spectacle before us. In front of us was my cousin, Jose, with his pants around his ankles, sweat pouring from his face, his loud grunts sounding like he would fall over and faint at any moment. He was having sex with a woman. She was bent over the large mahogany desk. She looked vaguely familiar. Knock, knock, I said as the door crashed on the wall, the sound of my voice finally interrupting the cocoon of bliss that had clearly enveloped them. As recognition took over, his concentration was interrupted. While his reaction was comical, the outright fear in her face spoke more about me to my silent companions than the names spoken by Jose. Demon, he said with a voice just above a whisper. What? Clean yourself up. I looked at the girl, disgust and contempt shooting daggers with every word into the woman. And get out. I looked at my cousin. The tone on my voice did not falter. Pull your pants up and compose yourself. Jesus Christ, you look like a hoodlum. I moved to the wall, and with a flip of a switch, I brought to life the large overhead fan in order to clear the room of the smell that threatened to impregnate my clothing. You should have called, Jose said, bravado returning to his voice as he smugly looked at me. His confidence built around the fact that the 6 guards that had followed me were still in the room. I could have. Take the bitch out of here. I looked at 2 of the guards that were having difficulties peeling their eyes off the woman. Give her your jacket so she can cover herself up. Without hesitation, one of the men took his jacket off and handed it to the woman. Her gratitude remained silent as she donned it in order to save whatever modesty and pride that remained. Again, I reached into my pocket and drew my pack of cigarettes. I needed to mask the scent in the room further. If there isn't anything else, the man that had impressed me so far interrupted the awkward silence that was threatening to descend on the room. We'll be going back to our positions. What's your name? I looked at the man. What branch? Francisco, he replied. United States Marines. 10 years, 5 tours. Semper Fi, devil dog. I looked at him. Did my brother hire you? Yes, sir. What is your position? Just another guard, he replied as he began to move outside. Who's the chief of security? I asked. Before he could answer, I held my hand up. Doesn't matter. Bring him here. Double time. Sir, he said as the remaining guards rushed out of the room, confused as to what we had just spoken. Who was the bitch? I asked my cousin as we remained alone in the room, the sounds of shuffling feet steadily moving away from us. She looked familiar. Jose was still reeling from the sudden departure of his security guards. Oh, yeah, that was Jessica. She went to school with you? Heard my dad say that you had a crush on her back in the day. No, I replied. While I was attracted to her in a physical way, and my body certainly had lusted for her, there was little more that I wanted from her. After seeing her as I had just a few minutes ago, whatever little desire I could have possibly held for her was completely burned off. I thought she had married some football player. Yeah, he replied as he lit a cigarette of his own. She came back a few months ago with a kid. I've been helping her get back on her feet. He caught himself after the words had escaped from his mouth. Clearly, I replied, don't bring her here anymore. If you want to screw her like a hooker, pay for a room to do it in. Before he could reply, Francisco returned with another man behind him. Who are you? I'm the chief of security, the man replied. Name is? 2 minutes. I looked at his eyes, peering into his weak soul as I spoke. It took your guards 2 minutes after I had already made my way past the single guard you left at the gate. The single guard who I disarmed and knocked out in a matter of seconds. He tried to stammer through excuses, words unable to take form. Not to mention the piss-poor training that the so-called security forces that you have designed to protect the interior grounds, with one exception. I looked at Francisco as I said the last part. But sir, in the blink of an eye, I had drawn my own pistol and held it an inch away from the center of his head. Jose jumped back. Francisco remained still, eyes fixed on me. The smell of urine helped mask the stench of my cousin's bodily fluids. Francisco, my hand remained steady as I spoke. Congrats. You're the new chief of security. Make sure that our newest recruit has clean uniforms. Check supplies, inventory, weapons, and men. Make adjustments as you see fit. I looked at the former chief. Do we have an issue with that? He shook his head without taking his eyes off the barrel of my pistol. Good. 3 hours. I lowered my weapon and returned it to the holster as the man took a deep breath. Wait, Jose stammered. Just what are you doing? The head of the family, my brother, is currently under federal custody. My eyes bore down on him, my voice increasing in volume as I continued. The family house is poorly protected. There is little to no family here. I took a step toward him. He began to back away. The self-appointed leader of the family is too busy his bitches in the main office, where all family business is discussed, to welcome a visitor or even respond to a great security breach. He began to cower as I closed the distance between him and I. I could smell the lingering smoke in his breath. With a deadly calm voice I concluded, Little cousin, I'm cleaning your mess. But you walked away. He whined. And yet, here I am, I replied, moving toward the large leather chair that served as the perfect complement to the large desk. If my family did not desperately need me, I wouldn't be here. Tell me where we stand, little cousin. We have 3 hours to burn. We talked for the entire time we sat across from one another. Mainly I was asking questions regarding the many business enterprises that I remembered, and listened to his news. My brother had been in jail for a few months before I made it into town. Angel's appearance made more sense. In that time, my cousin had managed to almost screw up every single business, costing the family a lot of money. Your brother was trying to expand the business into the weapons market. Jose began explaining the reason behind my brother's arrest. It was after the second or third large purchase that he got busted. The only details that I have heard are that there was a shootout between Angel and the former chief of security against the weapon dealers just as the feds popped up. Angel was at least smart enough to not turn his weapons against the feds, but they had what they needed. Who do you think they were after? I meant to ask that question to myself, trying to begin putting the entire situation together. Jose looked at me in confusion. The feds. They were there because someone informed them of the deal that was taking place. But they didn't get there until after the shooting began, Jose asked. I could see the wheels turning inside his head. Whether he was putting the same pieces together or if he was trying to figure out what I was thinking, I was not sure. You're right, I replied. Oh well, too bad there aren't any people we could ask about it, huh? I smiled at him. His face twisted in a strange reaction. Was it fear? Francisco's return interrupted our conversation. Guards are in place, Francisco said as he looked at me. All equipment is secured. I've made a list of additional guards we will need in order to fill gaps in the shifts, also to replace the few that are beyond incompetent. He handed me a piece of paper, then continued, Also, I have some ideas of additional training to make sure all the boys are on level footing. Get something together, I replied without taking the paper. Select as many leads as you think are necessary and get it done. Did you know the former chief of security? Yes, Francisco said, his face falling into a frown as depression took hold of him. My brother. I placed a hand on his shoulder, turned him to face me. I'm sorry. I said as the tears pooled in his eyes. Tell me about him. I led him to one of the chairs and forced him to sit down, while I moved to the liquor cabinet and poured 2 drinks. He was 6 years older than me, Francisco began. Joined the Marines as soon as he finished school. I followed him when I graduated. This was his last port when he met your brother. The two hit it off, and your brother offered him a job. When I finished my contract, he asked me to come here and work for your brother. My first day on the job, my brother told me that I would start at the bottom. Any shitty job, it was mine by default. As it should be, I replied, bringing a chuckle to Francisco's lips. He was there with your brother, he said, a tone of pride in his voice. He would have followed Angel to hell without being asked. Couldn't ask more from a devil dog, I replied, extending my hand to him. I only hope I can inspire just as much loyalty. Is there any other family? My sister-in-law, he replied. I've been looking out for her as much as I can. What do you mean? I asked, looking at Jose with renewed anger. Well, he continued, without my brother's income, she has been struggling making ends meet. She had to move into a shitty apartment so that she could make it without depending on me. She flat out refused any money from me, since I already send most of my paycheck to my folks. I see, Jose cowered as my stare burned into his soul. Francisco, have you ever heard the term ordo ad fratres faciendum? When he shook his head, I continued looking at my cousin. Don't worry about it. It's part of an old Sicilian tradition. Nothing to concern yourself with, my friend. I moved toward my cousin, who wisely moved as far out of the way as he could. Is there anything else you need me to take care of? Francisco asked, clearly confused by my cousin's movements. Yes, I replied. As a matter of fact, there is. My dear cousin here has guards assigned to him as temporary head of the family, I presume? He nodded. How many guards? 6, Francisco replied. How many does his dear wife have assigned to her? I looked at Jose. He had long ago lost the color on his face, but somehow he managed to become more pale. Francisco replied, none, sir. Your parents have none either, Jose replied, some way to justify his lack of concern for his dear wife. You're right, I replied. So your wife has skills with a concealed weapon that she carried at all times, just like my father does. And I suppose that your house is now surrounded by a large wall, much like their house is, correct? Jose remained mute. Francisco, grab a few of the boys. We need to make sure that my beloved cousin's wife is well guarded, so she will be moving here. Yes, sir. Also, I continued, you're going to have an extra 6 sets of hands to place as you see fit. My cousin is right. His house is plenty protected, so he will not need his personal security escort while he stays there. Wait. Jose began to protest. However, a single finger from my hand told him that it would be a mistake to finish his sentence. I'm sure that Edith will sleep better at night under guard, I continued. And considering that little show you had going on with Jessica a few hours ago, I'm sure that you haven't been home for a few. Yes, sir, Francisco smiled as he left the office. My look dared my cousin to protest more. Get the family together, I told him as I moved back to the chair. Don't tell them I am back in town. Just tell them you are calling a family meeting for tomorrow at noon. Call your wife. Tell her that we will be visiting tonight. I could use a good home-cooked meal. As he started to walk out of the office, I said, You broke this family's oath, little cousin. He had stopped in his tracks when I said those words. Blood was spilled on our behalf, and you ignored it. I won't forget it. The tiny body launched itself against me. The smell of her perfume was as intoxicating as it had been so many years before. Edith was a beautiful woman, standing as just over 5 feet, with long, brown hair. Her tiny almond-shaped eyes revealed a hint of Asian heritage. Her skin tone was always a bronze that many women paid large amounts of money to emulate. The sound of her voice would put a choir of angels to shame. My love, I replied, wrapping my arms around her. It has been far too long since I held you in my arms. Stop it, you charmer, she playfully smacked me on the chest. What are you doing back in town? How long have you been in? Not long, and I came because of Angel, I replied. I hope you made enough food and that you can pack fast. He told me, she replied, a sudden acidic tone to her voice. I have most of my things ready. Did you really kick him out of the house? She asked as she pulled into my arm, her question just above a whisper. Yes, I replied. I needed him out of the house if I was going to put everything back in order. So, you are back? I knew what she meant. I had been asking myself that same question. I had transitioned into the position with ease, almost as if by second nature. I had been telling myself that I was doing all this because my father asked me, because my brother needed me, and because Well, I really had no other reason. I'm not sure, I replied. There was complete honesty in my answer. One of the many doctors that I have seen in the past told me that the only way that I could achieve any form of closure would be to let go of things that cannot help me, things that are holding me back. I remembered the words that Dr. Cargill told me, long before Barbara had decided to screw my life up in her own way. Well, Edith said, trying to break the tension in the conversation, I made all your favorites and plenty of it. All I'm taking is in the room, she told the two men that had come with us. Do you want a drink? I will, I replied. They are on the job. As we walked into the house, they immediately rushed into the room. I'll have one as well, Jose added. Get it yourself. Edith's acidic tone shut him down. Sit, she ordered as she pointed me to one of the couches. Food is coming. As soon as the two guards finished moving her things into the vehicle, they piled food onto their plates. If you spill a single rice grain, you two will be cleaning the entire house. Do you hear me? It was comical to see a nearly 6-foot-tall linebacker run with a roll of napkins, fear painted on his face. Have you finished your degree? I asked her as she picked up the used dishes. Or have you been too busy playing housewife? I finished it, she dryly replied to my comment, one which I almost regretted as soon as it had been spat. Don't have much use for it, though. Bring your books, I replied. Freshen up on your studies, and if you need refresher courses, let me know. Do I sense a plan? She grinned as she again wrapped her arms around my neck, pulling my face down for a quick kiss. Or is this some clever way of convincing me to share a house with you? Because you know, I don't need much convincing when it comes to you. As Jose was left with his mouth open in surprise at our open display of affection, we left the house hand in hand. The drive to the house was not a very long one, but she had fallen asleep on my shoulder well before we had arrived. I carried her into the house. Francisco had done an excellent job at reorganizing the security around the house. I placed her softly in one of the rooms and made sure that the guards placed her things inside without disturbing her. I decided that I would spend the night in the house. Once again, Francisco did not fail to impress me. He had prepared a room for me before he had left. Not for the last time did I feel right about giving him the position his brother had filled. The following morning, I awoke at my usual early time, well before the sun had risen. I opened the door to my room and decided to use the gym in the property. It had been a long time since I had been able to feel completely relaxed. Francisco was already well into his morning. I could hear him shouting orders and instructions to his men as he led them in a choreographed physical training session. I knew the goal to such activities was to instill a sense of teamwork and discipline, things that the group sorely needed. I had completed my workout as he approached me, already prepared to give me the day's updates. Sir, he began, it's going to take some time, but I do believe that the men have what it takes to perform together in a cohesive unit. He beamed with pride. I also took the liberty of making arrangements for your family reunion this afternoon. However, I do have to say, you don't think anyone is going to listen to Jose, I finished for him. That's the whole point of this, my friend. I need to know who is loyal to him and who remains loyal to my brother. Make arrangements to call the family at 1 in the afternoon. Only then are we to inform them that I am back. Very good, sir, he replied as we got to the door. Before I finished putting in the last of the numbers in the keypad, Francisco continued. One more thing, he said. As I turned to look at him, I was tackled to the ground by a set of loving arms that immediately wrapped themselves on me well before gravity fulfilled its role. She asked me to distract you long enough to do that. Traitor, I replied as I got back to my feet. Edith's smile greeting me as I regained my footing. I see you slept well. I already made breakfast, she replied. Hurry up before it gets cold. She turned to walk inside the house as I followed. Since you decided to set me up, I told Francisco as he had begun to walk away, you might as well join us. Damn, he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a $20 bill, which he promptly handed to a smiling Edith. What did I miss? I asked, just as we reached the kitchen. Edith had prepared a spread, a large bowl of scrambled eggs, bacon, homemade biscuits, orange juice, coffee, and some sweetbreads. It was more than I expected, and my eager stomach was more than pleased at the future digestion. Francisco bet me that you were too high and mighty to eat with the help, she replied as she filled a plate and handed it to me. You are not the help, I told him. You are a great help, but you are not beneath me. You are not beneath anyone. You hear me? Did my brother ever look down on you? No, sir, he meekly replied. He did not. Then don't expect me to do so now, sit. As Edith handed him a plate filled with food, I continued. Tell me, what have you seen regarding my family? Sir, he began. I, of course, had never met you before, but heard a lot about you from your brother. He and I would often speak long into the night about you. He kept a close look at your career overseas. This was a surprise to me, but I did not interrupt him as he continued his story. About a year ago, things began to look grim. More and more businesses were losing money. Murders were being carried out in protected areas, children were given drugs, and hookers began to move into the neighborhoods. He looked at Edith. I apologize, ma'am. I've heard worse. She laughed as she took a large bite of her toast. Your brother received a call about a new mover that was selling weapons at a highly discounted price. He took a bite from his breakfast as he continued his story. I offered to pick up the shipment, but he flatly refused. Instead, he sent me over to your parents' house with a handful of men. Edith spoke. Do you know who could have done it? Well, ma'am, he continued, as far as I can see it, whoever did it had to have extensive knowledge of how we operate. Also, if my brother suspected a trap, he would have gone himself. My brother would have thought that they knew where my parents lived, I added. That is why he sent his most trusted man to watch them. Yes, sir, he replied as he continued eating. For a long time, only the clattering of our utensils broke the silence of the room. All three of us had the same thought going through our heads. Do you think it was my husband? She grabbed my hand as she asked her question. Francisco looked at me for a second before averting his eyes and returning them to the plate of food. Like always, my dear, I replied, kissing her in the forehead. Your food was superb. Thank you so very much, Francisco, and I have to go check on the boys now. Thank you for the food, ma'am, he said as we both stood. Make sure you are ready by 12, I told Edith as we walked outside. We'll be having a small gathering. Call my godmother. She still has her catering business. You shouldn't cook this brunch. I would much prefer you standing by my side. She smiled and blushed a bit as Francisco and I walked out of the kitchen area. She is a wonderful woman, he told me as we stepped outside. Don't let her demeanor fool you, I replied. She is one of the most loving women I have ever met in my life. But she is also one of the most dangerous and unforgiving people I have ever come across in my life. She loves as strongly as she hates. So, your cousin? Yeah, I laughed. He's pretty much screwed. I'm honestly surprised he still has his little tool attached to his body. Little cousin, I greeted Jose as we made our way back from inspecting the men. All of them were in fine spirits, honorable, respectful, and most importantly fearful of my reputation. Francisco was a fine leader. He knew each man by name and often knew personal details about each of their lives. Children's names, wives' names, to the point where he reminded one man in particular that it was his anniversary by ordering him to buy flowers for his wife. To say I was impressed was an understatement. Jose carried a small manila folder with scribbled handwriting. I could tell this was a series of usernames and passwords to an extensive collection of websites and programs. Are these all the numbers? He nodded as I took the folder from his hands and handed it to Francisco. Take this to Edith. I think she is up to date on her accounting so that she can make some sense of the information here. Yes, sir. He stood and moved past Jose without so much as a glance. You could have just asked me, Jose said. I could have explained everything to you. Nah, I replied. Don't worry yourself about that. We have the help to do that sort of thing. I hoped that the words sounded familiar to him, but either he had become a great actor, or hearing his words being repeated to him did not seem out of place. Is all the family in the dining room? I asked just as the clock chimed, reminding us that it was noon. We walked together. Francisco stood like a sentinel at the door to the dining room. I sent out the message, Jose said, but no one listened to you, I replied as I opened the door. As I expected, the table was empty. No one had bothered to show up at my cousin's request. Francisco? Yes, sir, he replied. Gentlemen, proceed, he said into the radio as all three of us took a seat in the dining room table. Jose nearly lost it when he saw that Francisco was sitting to my left. Why is he here? Contempt dripped from every syllable. He should be outside making sure that he is exactly where he needs to be, I interrupted. Reaching into my pocket, I took the ever-present pack of cigarettes out. I offered one to Francisco and took one for myself. Using his lighter, he lit both of our cigarettes before I continued. Tell me more about the day my brother was arrested, little cousin. You know as much as I do, I'm sure, he spat. I'm sure that bitch I call a wife filled you in last night. Using the back of my hand, I slapped the taste out of his mouth. I told you, little cousin, there would be no more bitches allowed in this house. I also told you to at least pretend to respect your wife. As he rubbed his face, tears began to fill his eyes. All calls have been made, sir, Francisco interrupted after a small drowned-out voice brought the radio to life. I suggest we move outside. Lead the way, little cousin, I said. We set up a nice little picnic in the back deck. I'll be joining you all momentarily. Francisco stood and guided Jose outside. Oh, I nearly forgot. Francisco? Yes, sir, he said as he pushed Jose into the wall in one swift movement. Years of pent-up anger were put into that single move. Jose's forehead collided with the concrete, making a sickening thump. With a second move, Jose's legs were parted just as hands began to roam throughout his body. This time, Jose carried a small pistol in the small of his back. For a second, I was impressed until I saw the weapon closely. All clear, sir. What was that about? Jose screamed as he regained his balance and composure. Making sure you aren't wired or carrying a weapon. I laughed as I held the small derringer. You do know they call these purse pistols, right? Yeah, it's a .45, but a single shot? Come on, little cousin. This way, Francisco said as he again led the way. A smile covered his face. I knew he would take great pleasure in doing that to my cousin. Sir, ETA for your guests is 45 minutes. Will you be needing anything before then? No, I replied. Carry on. I shouldn't be long. Didn't get enough last night? Jose smirked. One look from me told him that this comment had been a mistake. Before I could move, he was already making his hurried way toward the backyard. Both Francisco and I shook our heads at the cowardly display and laughed. After a painful climb up the stairs, I knocked on her door softly. Are you ready yet? Almost, Edith replied through the door. Is it time already? Yes, I replied. The show is about to start, and can't do it without the supporting actress, I joked. So hurry, your pretty little bum. Francisco will tell you where you need to be. The backyard was littered with faces drowning in a sea of murmurs and hushed whispers. The chaotic waves of movement brought an ever more common smile to my face. As I stepped into the sunlight, the voices immediately became mute. I turned to find my cousin. He had been placed in his designated seat as I had instructed. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice said over the loudspeaker, please take your seats. As you all know, I began after taking my own seat in the main table. This table was set in a small platform a few inches higher than the ground. It gave the vision that this table held the most important members of the family. After this meeting, it would. As you all know, Angel is in prison. As I spoke, the men moved in pairs towards the tables. Each pair flanked the head of each respective table. The nervousness of the family members in attendance was palpable. The fact that Jose had no guards in his table made the rest of the family, particularly Jose, think that they were about to be punished for their earlier insult. Until he is either released or killed, I will be acting on his behalf as head of the family. If there are any complaints or concerns, now is the time to speak up. Are you taking over from Jose? One of my uncles fearfully asked. I did not expect this to be the first question. No, I replied. I am taking over for my brother. My cousin will be ineligible to be the head of the family for reasons that I will reveal in a few minutes. Why should we follow you? Another voice asked. The owner took particular care to not be noticed. However, my guards revealed who the person that had spoken was. You are free to walk out, start your own organization, I replied. You all know who I am. Some of you might even know what I have been doing since I left. My reasons for leaving are still the same. I want nothing to do with the dirty money that this enterprise creates. This is a favor to my family. I will be here as long as it takes. How are we expected to speak openly when your guards have us surrounded? Another of my uncles spoke, as he looked directly at the guards that were standing directly behind him. When have I not been a man of my word, uncle? My pained look shamed him into silence. If any of you feel intimidated by the guards, all you have to do is ask them to leave. 2 tables asked their guards to leave. These 2 tables had been the main ones that had asked the questions. Anyone else? The silence of the crowd gave me the answer. Good. Second order of business is simple enough. Those tables that still have guards with them, those are now your guards. They will follow you everywhere, give their lives to protect you if necessary. However, you will have to supply their salaries and their clothing allowance. I will supply their weapons and training. The silence was replaced by a tone of approval from the families that did not dismiss their guards. Those that do not have guards, you will continue to have no guards. Not even your privately hired ones. If I learn that you have hired private security, I will take it as a personal insult and will respond accordingly. The few tables that had dismissed their guards began to protest. I asked you to trust me, and you did not. I will not tolerate dissidents in this family. The guards will answer to my new chief of security, I said as Francisco emerged and took a seat in my table. He answers only to me. Third order of business, and the reason why Jose cannot lead this family on my brother's behalf. The family now has an accountant. It will be this person's responsibility to track our investments, our principal, our capital. May I present you, Edith? When she emerged, all mouths, including my own, fell open. Edith had decided to wear a white summer dress that cut off just above her knees. It was slightly form-fitting. She was careful to show off her modest curves, but at the same time keeping a sense of modesty. She wore a large hat to shield her from the sun. A set of small heels completed her outfit. As she took her seat to my right in the table, I continued. Because of her new position, having my dear cousin as head of the family would pose an incredible conflict of interests. From now on, any money exchange will bear both her signature and mine. I cannot approve monetary purchases without her, and she cannot do the same without my approval. Murmurs of agreement were heard through the crowd. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I continued. There is a large amount of money missing. At both my chief of security and accountant's suggestion, I will allow for a week of amnesty. All outstanding debts, all unapproved investments, all unaccounted for assets will be declared, no questions asked. Whatever is not declared or paid by this time next week will be considered an attempt to cheat the family and will be handled accordingly. A few gulps were heard. 1 week of amnesty. Until all funds are properly accounted for, the family accounts will be frozen. In 90 days, I will know who has and has not cheated the family. I highly suggest that you take advantage of the week of amnesty. Don't forget about the other thing, honey, Edith said as she grabbed my arm in a loving fashion. She took special care to wrap her arms around mine, clearly showing her intentions to declare herself my equal. If I did not know any better, I would think she was declaring to any woman in the gathering that she was claiming me as her own. Oh, right. Thank you, sweetheart, I replied. Someone in attendance, perhaps it is more than one person, has valuable information regarding how and why my brother was set up. The week of amnesty applies in that aspect as well. Come clean now, or hope I don't find you. People turned and looked at each other in suspicion. And trust me, I will find you. I allowed a few seconds of silence to drive the uncertainty home for each of the people sitting before me. Now, I interrupted the increasing suspicion in the patio. I could already see who the snakes were as they were trying to hide in the grass. Please, enough unpleasant news. Eat up, enjoy yourselves. This is a family gathering after all. As everyone began to move toward the large tables that had been decorated with various foods, I reached out and grabbed Edith just as she tried to stand. Where are you going? To grab you a plate of food. The surprise in her voice was amusing. Not today, baby, I said as I kissed her cheek. You look beautiful, by the way. Gorgeous. There are goddesses out there dying of envy at this very moment. Today, you just enjoy yourself. I enjoy taking care of you, Dee. And you do a fine job, but let me take care of you for tonight. She blushed. I got something special for you. A gift? Her smile was like a child's. Two. Actually, I said as I pointed at the door just as Jessica walked into the backyard. Edith's demeanor immediately changed. Her anger was boiling over. She was ready to pounce on her like a lioness is pouncing on her prey. Hold on, baby. You'll like this much more. I took her hand and led her toward Jose's table. Just behave yourself, please. Trust me, it'll be worth your while. Okay, she said in an angry tone. Again, she reminded me so much like a child throwing a temper tantrum. I trust you. Jessica, I cheerfully said as she turned to look at me. Her smile quickly disappeared as she noticed who my companion was. Don't, I said as she tried to move away. She stood still, again frozen in place. Come, I said as I took her arm and led her to Jose's table. As he saw us approaching, he tried to run away but realized that he had nowhere to go. He was trapped, like an animal. Hello, Jessica, Jose quietly said. It's been a long time since I've seen you. Shut your mouths, both of you, I said. Here is what is going to happen. Jessica, you now work for me. Here is your new job. You are to watch over the former, albeit temporary, leader of the family. You are not to allow anyone to get near him. If even a hair on his head is ever out of place, well, you don't want to find out how long it takes for Lai to eat through human flesh. Do you understand? Yes, Jessica said. Good. If he makes a pass at you, I want to know about it immediately. If you make a pass at him, trust me, I'll know immediately. Remember, no one is to get near him with the exceptions of myself, and of course my chief of security. Screw up this job and you are gone. Understood? Yes, she meekly replied. Good, I said. Go report to Francisco. He will make preparations to get you fully trained and give you uniforms. She immediately moved away. Little cousin, you get your own personal bodyguard. You should thank me. Thank you. The poison in his voice was not even disguised. I didn't want you to continue to feel unprotected, I smiled. I know that was a big concern for you. Edith and I walked away. Just as we were out of his hearing range, she began to laugh softly. He gets to be around her all the time, but he can't screw her. That is a great gift, Dee, thank you. And because she will be around him all the time, he won't get to screw anyone else, my dear. Here's your second gift, I said as her food was brought to our table. Your favorite, lobster tail and scallops in a butter and lime sauce, with grilled broccoli and baby corn. I had known this was her favorite dish for many years. This was the first time that I had acknowledged that I knew this. I hope you enjoy it, my dear. I kissed her cheek as tears began to roll from her eyes. You wonderful, wonderful man. She kissed me openly on the lips. Thank you. You deserve it, I replied. Have a seat. Enjoy your dinner. I pulled her chair out so she could sit comfortably. I have a feeling that the rats are going to come out of hiding, I whispered in her ear. Sir, Francisco interrupted. There is someone asking to meet with you confidentially. Excuse me, my dear. I told Edith. Let's go, my friend. I have a feeling that I will miss out on a lot of this party. Thank you for coming forward with this information, cousin. I told the balding man sitting across from me. Cousin Armando was 15 years older than me, with a balding head and a growing gut. His father had died when I was a baby, but my father often spoke great things about the man. If there is anything that you need, please do not hesitate to ask. Thank you, Demon, he replied. It was a shame what happened to Angel. That was the reason why I had temporarily left the organization. As soon as I heard you were back, well, I had to let you know that I was behind you. Of course, cousin. I stood and shook his hand. I value your trust, and I appreciate your confidence. As he walked away, Francisco looked at me with concern. There is one more person that wants to speak with you, sir, he said, but this person specifically asked to speak only with you. Fine, I said as I lit another cigarette and poured myself another drink. I was beginning to regret not taking Edith up on her offer to get me a plate of food. Go and grab you some chow. Make sure that the men have eaten. Sir, he nodded as he stepped out of the office. As I rubbed my temples, a soft knock on the door interrupted the few seconds of respite I had been given. Before I could answer, the door was opened and a goddess appeared before me. I want to thank your godmother for making that dish for me, Edith said. My breath had escaped me, and for a second my brain had ceased to work properly. Imagine my surprise when she told me she had not cooked it, but that you had. She walked around the desk, turned my chair to face her, and sat on the desk with her legs seductively crossed. Why would you do something like that for me? I wanted to, I replied. You deserved something nice. It was the least I could do. She interrupted me with a kiss. Her lips silenced any protest that could have escaped from my lips. Without a thought, my hands reached for her. I pulled her softly toward me and placed her on my lap without interrupting our kiss. Not even your cousin has ever done anything that sweet for me, she said between kisses. I rarely eat that because of how hard it is to cook it properly, she continued, kissing me. Everything in that plate was magnificent. I'm glad you liked it, I said, but there is someone here to see me, and as much as I would like to continue this, business has to come first. She pouted before standing up, taking care to smooth her dress before walking out of the office. We will continue this discussion after the party, I said as she opened the door. Fine, Dee, she replied, but numbers don't lie, she added, more to keep up the appearance that we were discussing some business matter. He is ready for you, Uncle. Pops. I said as the man walked into the office. What are you doing here? I'm here to speak with the demon, not with my son, he said. How can I help you, Uncle? I replied in the formal tone. Even though he was my father, this was the customary way to address the men in our family from the earlier generation. In the family business, all men were uncles or cousins. The few that made it to their elder years were respectfully addressed as grandfather. He reached into his coat and pulled an envelope with a very familiar seal. A seal that I had seen a few times before many years ago, and one that I never thought I would ever see again. This was dropped off in my house, Demon, he said. It was addressed to you. The agent that dropped it off asked me to deliver a message. The king is back. He said that you would know what it meant. Thank you, Uncle, I replied as he began to move to the door. I will be staying here for the time being. 2 of my men will be watching over you. No need, he replied. He was a very nice young man, he replied. Told me that he made sure that no one would bother us so long as I delivered the letter. But I agree, you should stay here. There is a lot of work to do, and this is the place for the head of the family. It suits you, son. I opened the envelope and carefully read the message within. By the third reading, I was completely sure that there was no mistake. I made my way to the party as it waned down. Few of the guests had been waiting for me to reappear in order to say their goodbyes. Little by little, people began to leave as the party ended. As the last of the guests began to make their way out of the house, I looked at Francisco. "Bring Edith with you to the office. There is something we need to discuss." "Yes, sir. Everything okay?" His look of concern was genuine. It was a look aimed at a friend and not an employer. "It will be, my friend," I said. "I need some food." "Your godmother saved you some, sir," he replied. "I'll bring it to your office once I find Edith." "Good, thank you," I replied as my thoughts moved away from this place, into a time many years before when I last heard that particular saying, "The king is back." There was only one man that I have known to have used that particular homage, and I had thought him dead for many years. The only man I had ever learned to fear, my friend Elvis. "What is going on?" Edith asked as both she and Francisco entered the office. There was concern in their eyes. "Francisco told me you seemed off after your father left." "Here," I said as I handed Francisco the letter I had received from my father. "Read it so that Edith can hear its contents." "CIA?" he said as he looked at the seal embedded in the top right corner of the envelope. "Sir, what is this?" "Just read the letter," Edith said. "We can play 20 questions later." "My friend," Francisco began to read aloud. "It seems that our paths are crossing again. It has been some years since our little adventure in Fallujah. I know you haven't forgotten. It's not easy to bleed beside a man and not call him a brother. So as a brother, I ask that you meet me. A mutual friend is concerned about you and the reasons why you decided to return to your family. You often told me about that little restaurant that you were so fond of. Tomorrow night will be a great time to have dinner there. 1900, alone, your friend, Elvis." "Who is this friend?" Edith spoke. She grabbed my arm with concern and led me to the couch I had recently brought into the office. Francisco reread the letter to himself, carefully returned it into the envelope, and moved to grab 2 glasses which he filled with the liquid. He gave one to Edith, which she offered me. The second one he took for himself. In one single gulp, he downed the contents of the glass. "He is a man I served with while in the military," I began. "After we completed jump school, we went our separate ways. He went as Special Forces selection, I went to Ranger school. Didn't see him for years after." "Well, it looks like you deployed with him," Edith said. "You two served in Fallujah together." That's what he said in that letter. "After I got out," I continued, "you know, I took a job as a contractor. That's when I ran into him. My company had been hired by the CIA to help carry out some jobs. By that time, he too had left the military and had become a spook. He had heard about my reputation. Shit, I had been approached by many intelligence groups. I thought he was just another recruiter when I first saw him." "What was the mission that he is talking about?" Francisco poured himself another drink. He made sure he referenced it in the letter for a reason. "We had this rule," I said. "If we ever need to send each other correspondence, we would reference 2 events that only the other person would know about. Fallujah was one. The restaurant was the other one. Except it was not a restaurant, but he often called it that." "What place was it?" Edith asked. I often told him about my parents' tradition of making me cook for them every time I would visit. I handed Francisco the empty glass, which he promptly refilled. He would call that Dee's Kitchen and said it must be my favorite restaurant. "What do you think he wants?" Edith asked in a panic. "I'll send some men out to your parents' home," Sir Francisco said at the same time. "No need," I said. "He gave my father his word that there would be no issues. I suspect he has some of his agents around their property, keeping them safe from whatever he thinks will come out of this. I told you both about Officer Sandoval. I think he is the mutual friend that he is referring to in his letter. I thought you said he was talking to the FBI?" Francisco took a cigarette out and offered me one, which I greedily took. "CIA, FBI, what do they want?" Edith was again throwing a tantrum. Her innocence and simplicity brought a smile to my face. "Let me tell you about the job in Fallujah," I replied. "It'll clear up some questions, I'm sure." It had not been my first time in Fallujah, both as a soldier and as a contractor, but of all the times that I had the misfortune of visiting, this particular time would stick with me for years. Once, a woman had made a comment that I scream in my sleep. This is the reason why I do. The things we had to do that day will forever haunt me and would forever change the way I looked at my friend. The mission was simple: roll into town, find the terrorist cells hiding, engage in some unconventional firefights, and call it a day. We would be supporting 2 Marine divisions, 3 Army companies, along various special operation groups. On paper, we had an overwhelming force. The reality was far from it. By this point, the majority of the troops were completely exhausted. Weeks of back-to-back engagements had seriously depleted their combat strength. We were trying to take over this damned alley of death for the third time. It often took us longer to regain the city than it did to lose it again. I was beginning to wonder if all the blood we had spilled in those damned streets was even worth the effort. Some of my fellow contractors and soldiers wondered aloud the reasons why we simply didn't just nuke the shit out of the place and get it over with. We were set to attack in the middle of the night. Our technological superiority gave us a great advantage during that time of day. The temperatures dropped greatly and made moving about with all the gear almost tolerable. By the time that the operation began, we realized that the commanders had become far too complacent, far too cocky, and had greatly underestimated the local forces. They were more than ready for us. Their clever ambush neatly split our forces into two. Chaos took hold as commanders shouted orders and allowed fear to overwhelm them. Left and right, men fell to a hail of bullets that rained from all around. Large fires were lit and made our night vision technology obsolete. The attacks were intended to maim and injure, to slow our progress. It was highly successful. By the time the sun rose, the streets were covered in American blood and gore. Brass and spent ammunition covered the copper smell. The shush tones of the call of prayer gave us some respite. In American retreat, there is nothing more painful to watch. The records, of course, paint a far different picture. History is written not by who's right, but rather by who is left. 3 days after that massacre, a second invasion was planned. This time it would be spearheaded by both special operations and contractors. This time, our approach was vastly different. Again, we struck at night. This time immediately after the last call to prayer of the day. We led the attack. Irritating things like rules of engagement did not apply to us. We brought destruction with us. Men and boys were rounded up and arrested. Women were left defenseless. We neared what we suspected was the base of operations for this latest group of freedom fighters. Already the main structure was under fire. Within minutes, we stormed and secured the bodies within the structure and had moved them to our own structures. No casualties this time. We kept the prisoners tied up, their eyes and ears covered completely to give them a sense of confusion. I knew exactly what they felt. I had received similar treatment in one of the many training requirements that I had to undergo. It gave you a sense that you were completely alone, that you were truly isolated from everyone around you. The truth was that there was a second person in the same position as you, not 3 feet away. Sometimes, headphones were placed in the prisoner's ears and white noise was pumped into their ears. This often drove the listener temporarily insane. Imagine standing next to a loudspeaker that is lasting music. You know that feeling you get in your chest from the bass coming out of those speakers? Imagine that same feeling, but with no additional noise to give it credit. No solace. Nothing that will help you ease the discomfort. "I'll be damned," the man in the battle fatigues said as he walked into the room. I had been the lucky one to be selected to guard the prisoners while the spooks were gathered to interrogate them. "If it ain't my good buddy, D, how the hell have you been, man?" "Holy shit," I said once I recognized the man. "Elvis has entered the building." "The king is back," he replied, hugging me tightly. It had been years since I had seen this man. "So you're the bearded devil I've heard so much about?" "Yeah," I said. That name had been given to me by the locals when I took my first tour as a contractor. I never carried any identification, anything that could give away my name to anyone. Instead, I was given that loving name by the group that had at one point offered $3 million for my head. "I didn't know you became a spook. What's up with that?" "Hey man," he replied, "it's good money." After the second contract, I got approached by the NSA and the CIA. They made a better pitch, man. Hung the boots and here I am. "How long you been in theater?" This time, going on 9 months, I replied, "I've only made it back home once or twice." "Yeah? Damn. We are definitely gonna have to do some catching up, man. But I got some business to take care of at the moment. You can step outside, D. This won't take long." He was right. It didn't. Within minutes, we were on our way to whatever location he had managed to extract from whatever poor fool he had selected. I was not entirely sure what had gone on inside that room, but Elvis did not change his tone of voice or his cheerful nature. The house that we were to go into had been cleared already, but the intel that we had received let us know that we had missed something. As Elvis moved ahead of us, he drew his rifle before knocking. As the door was held slightly ajar, Elvis moved to kick it open. The old woman that had held the door crashed into the floor. Elvis immediately gave commands in the native tongue while the rest of us took our positions, immediately securing the bodies inside. Elvis had grabbed a small boy and forced him to move a piece of carpet that hid the trapdoor under the house. Elvis gave the boy commands to open it. The women in the room were desperately trying to get the child back into their midst. One of Elvis's men used the butt of his weapon to silence the mother of the child. Elvis continued to shout orders. Hesitantly, the child moved to open the door. He briefly glanced over to where his mother lay in the ground. As soon as the trapdoor was opened, a shot tore through the boy's head. From under the house, screams and gunfire began to penetrate through the floor. Without much concern, Elvis withdrew 2 grenades from his vest, removed the primary pin, and tossed them through the trapdoor. A silence followed soon after the explosions. "Come on, D." He looked back at me as he once again lifted the door. "Let's see what's left of those worms." Jumping feet first into the area, I could smell the burned flesh. I followed him soon after. Not even my wildest nightmares could prepare me for the sight that met me as I turned around. Walls were covered in blood and intestines. There were pieces of what once used to be men. The charred remains of multiple faces were permanently burnt into the walls and into my memory. "It's a good thing we still got a few of them back in the compound," Elvis said, almost in a cheerful tone. "Not much left of them to tell here." From the corner of my eye I saw it. The gun fired 3 rounds in complete panic and absolutely no control. One of the rounds found Elvis's arm. The second and third rounds went flying wildly about us. Instinctively, I fired at the blurry body behind the pistol. My well-controlled 3-round burst found the center of the face. It was a boy, no older than 12 years old, that I had just killed. "Scumsucker!" Elvis screamed, drawing his rifle and took aim at the boy's body. He must have emptied an entire magazine into it. By the time he was done, there was nothing left to identify that this boy once had a head. "You got your aid bag nearby, D?" "Yeah," I replied. "It's in the convoy vehicle. I am not the medic in this op." "Cool. Bandage me up, will you?" Elvis moved up the stairs. "Boys, burn this place to the ground." They did. We made it to the vehicle. As I cleaned the wound and bandaged it, Elvis looked at me with amusement. "What?" I continued my work as I asked him. "You are good," he replied. "Far better than the bookworms made you out to be. You didn't lose your cool, and you saved my bacon. You didn't even hesitate, bro. Just leveled your rifle and bang, bang, bang." "Yeah," I replied. "Sucks about the boy." "Sucks to be him," he replied. "Wait, which one are you talking about? Does it matter?" "Well," he replied as he moved his arm, content at the work I had done in his arm. "The boy that opened the trapdoor knew that they would fire immediately once the door was opened. So did the women. The one inside was already a man. You saw him, cold-blooded. He tried to kill me. There are no innocent people here, D. You know that?" "That's true," I replied, more to end the conversation than for any other reason. "Where are you going next?" "You guys are coming with us," he replied with a grin. "That was just the tip of the iceberg from the intel I got from one dude. Imagine how much we'll get from the rest of the worms in the compound." I shuddered to think of more scenes like this one. That was exactly what we got. Day after day, 5 of us contractors followed the CIA operators from town to town. Each town held a bigger piece of value than the previous one. The villagers learned to fear the dust rising from our tires as we drove. I was no stranger to the brutality of war, nor was it strange for me to take a life with complete callousness and detachment. But even I felt like I was drowning in a sea of blood by the time we had returned to my headquarters. "If you ever need a job," Elvis said as I got out of his vehicle, "look me up. I've seen your file. D, you and I would be completely unstoppable. Think about it." "I will." I shook his hand and watched him as he drove away. I did think about the job. In fact, I was prepared to take it. I spoke to my boss about it. It was my time with Elvis that truly cemented my reputation. After this job, my employer felt that I needed the break, which would lead me to meeting Dr. Cargill. "Jesus Christ," Edith said. "No wonder you drink so goddamned much." "Of all the people that considered me dangerous," I replied, "Elvis was the one man I've ever met that I considered dangerous. He is like me in more ways than I care to admit. But he has nothing to lose, absolutely nothing. What do you want to do about him, boss?" Francisco looked at me. He fully understood the story I had just shared with them. "Have dinner," I replied. "See what it is that he has to say to me." "I'll let the boys know to keep an eye out," Francisco said. "Do you need me to do anything?" "Just remain calm," I replied. "Go set Jessica up with whatever she needs. Also, find Cousin Armando a good position within the family." "Did he give you the information that you needed?" Edith said. "No," I replied. "But he did point me in the right direction, though. That was far more than anyone else did." "I'll take care of it, sir," Francisco said. "If there is nothing else, I will retire for the night." "Ma'am." Francisco left. In the room, it was just Edith and myself. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Edith took her place on my lap as if it was the most natural place for her to be. I opened my arms in order to grab her and hold on to her. This was as natural to me as breathing. There was comfort in that perfume. There was comfort in her voice. There was comfort in her mere presence. For right now, just you, I answered. We still have some numbers to run, don't we? You know, she said, I really care for you. You are the most wonderful man that I have ever met. For many years I have always thought highly of you. But I know you. I know your sense of honor, and I don't think you'll go through with it. All my life, I replied, I have always tried to do the right thing. Always been the good guy. You know what it's gotten me? I pointed at the empty glass in my hand. Edith stood up and moved toward the bottle. She opened it and poured the drink into the glass. This is all it's gotten me. I'm a borderline alcoholic. I smoke like a chimney. I have nightmares every night. I cannot build lasting relationships. I am damaged, and the best thing that I have ever been able to do is put holes in people and plug holes into others. At the end of the night, I am alone. I am an island. You are alone because you want to be alone, she replied. I am here for you. For how long, I thought. My mind continued its silent wording of these words, even as I just looked on the woman, this goddess standing before me. But I've heard that line so many times, I don't know what to make of it. I heard it from my wife before she got pregnant by another man. I heard it from a woman that ended up being married to my psychiatrist. How many times can I hear it before I stop believing it? I looked at Edith. I don't want anything more than just you. Will it bother you that I am technically married? I don't really care, I replied as I drank the contents of the glass. I don't have time to care. I grabbed her and pulled her violently to me, dropping the glass onto the floor. My hands remained clasped behind her back, pulling her more toward me as if I was trying to make us both into a single being. Her hands reached behind me, pulling me into her in much the same way. Not here, she whispered. Come. She pulled away, and without releasing my hand, she guided me to the room she had been occupying since I had brought her here. The room itself was a direct contrast to the rest of the house. While the house was cold and almost unwelcoming to any joy, this room was not. The smell of flowers and incense embraced me as the door was opened. I could almost imagine the chirping of birds in the air, the feel of the breeze caressing my face. It was truly as if I was stepping into another realm. Edith truly was a goddess in her little piece of paradise. One of my hobbies is an interior design, she giggled as I stood in the doorway, dumbstruck by the beauty of this room. You did a great job, I replied as I followed Edith into the room. The door silently shut behind us. This place is like a little slice of heaven. Her lips interrupted me, almost as if a match had been lit. Our passion reignited in a fury of kisses and caresses. I reached for Edith's dress and violently ripped it open. A gasp escaped from her lips when the fabric tore. The tattered dress rested throughout the room's floor. Before me, she stood in her glorious beauty. White low-cut bra and matching thong adorned her. Not to mention my great taste in clothing, she replied just before she reached out and tore my own shirt open, much like I had done her dress. We were violent. We both knew this would not be a tender and loving mating. There was something unsaid in the air. Once we were done, I said, that was intense. I can't remember what I was worrying about just a few minutes ago. Minutes. She laughed that laugh that I had adored for so many years. Sweetie, we have been screwing for over an hour. I was literally chalking the shit out of you for a good 5 minutes before you actually came. Everything I have read about it, it should have killed you. I almost stopped actually. It's a good thing that you didn't, I said. It really was intense. But now, I must go, my dear. I have things to prepare for, and I don't much like it. Tell me about him, she pleaded. I know you were holding back in your story. There is a lot that you didn't say. From what you told us, yes, he does sound like a monster, but I know you. Maybe more than you know yourself. What are you hiding? A lot, I replied. Too much maybe. I don't want to talk about it, Edith. But if you ask, I will tell you. I will tell you everything. Why are you so afraid of him? How do you see me? I asked. What do you mean? She crawled her way under the covers of her bed, reaching into her nightstand. She pulled a pack of my brand of cigarettes which she tossed at me. You know I don't like you smoking, but it seems to be a part of who you are. There's also some vodka in the cabinet behind you. I crawled into her and kissed her gently before I stood and grabbed for the bottle. What do you see when you look at me? A broken man, she replied. There is something about you that has changed so much in the years that you were away. Of course I know some of what you did. Your brother and I spoke pretty frequently. But what he told me and what I see, they just don't add up. You have grown cold and distant to almost everyone, yet you inspire so much loyalty from people around you. Even Francisco is more than ready to give his life up for you, and it is clear to everyone that you would do the same for him. Hell, you would do the same for everyone that you feel deserves your loyalty. But it's like you are alone. Inside your own mind you are alone. Your eyes, they have seen so much, and all I want to do is take some of that weight off your shoulders. It pains us, all of us, to see you walking around with so much pain. Elvis and I are so alike. We are cut from the same cloth. Everyone that saw us work together just knew that, if it wasn't for the fact that he is half Asian, people would think that we were brothers. In fact, a lot of people always assume that we grew up together because of how alike we are. I took a drink from the bottle before continuing. He scares me because he is what I fear I will become one day. He is ruthless, calloused, almost inhuman, a complete sociopath in every sense of the word, and every time I look at him, I feel like I am just a step behind him. Everything you described about me, I can describe about him. It scares me to think that he is what I will become one day. You know we wouldn't let you. She reached out and grabbed my face, forcing me to look into her eyes. We all care far too much about you to allow that to happen. Yeah, I replied. And now he comes with the weight of the federal government wondering what I am doing here. He is holding all the cards. He knows everything about me, I'm sure. I am walking into that meeting completely blind. You never were a planner, she laughed. Now go. Get out of my room. A girl has to get her sleep. Would you like breakfast tomorrow? No, I replied. Sleep in, please. I need to go visit my brother tomorrow. There is still a lot to do before I can relax. Don't forget that I need you to look at the numbers again. See exactly how much is missing and who has it. Did you hear me? I turned to look at Edith. Her sleeping form greeted me. A blissful peace coated her face. A slight smile tempted me to want to know what her dreams were like. I couldn't remember the last time I had a normal dream. I couldn't remember a night that I was not woken up from a nightmare. Silently, I made my way out of her room and into the darkened hall, the light of the cigarette lighting my way. I am here to see Caesar, I told the woman that was sweeping the outside of the modest house. This was not the best neighborhood, but it was far from the worst. Garbage littered the streets, and food stands adorned the main corners. Children played soccer in the middle of the streets, rocks marking the goalposts. Music flowed throughout the air, laughter and screams combined in its own chorus. This was where I had grown up so many years before. My oldest brother had inherited this house when he found a wife. Yeah, he's inside. Caesar. She screamed without stopping her actions. Someone here to see you. What the hell are you? He stopped as he looked at me, a pistol in his own hand. Brother, is that for me? I walked up to him as I looked at the weapon in his hand. He sheepishly tucked it into his pants before opening his arms and embracing me. Of course not, he replied with a smile. Come in, brother. Take a seat. What can I do for you? First, tell me why you greet visitors with a weapon in hand. I sat in the couch within the living room. This room brought so many memories that I felt that I no longer deserved. There was happiness in this home. My presence here was only tainting that. Things have changed, little brother, he replied. Want something to drink? I could use a beer, I replied. Vodka if you have some. Have you had breakfast? I shook my head. Bloody Mary then. I'll be back. Let me introduce you to my wife. I don't think you met her before you left. As he left me alone in the room, I began to walk around, looking at the pictures that hung in the walls. Many of those pictures were of our parents in their own younger days. Few of the pictures were of us growing up. I allowed myself a rare smile as I looked at a picture of me as a small child standing with my brothers. My hand in the picture held a military salute. Even at that young age, I had wanted to be a soldier. I remembered that day. We had decided to climb one of the mountains in the area. I was the youngest, of course, so my brothers had to do most of the heavy lifting, namely me. By the time we got to the top, a friend that had come with us snapped that picture. That is my daddy. A small voice broke my fantasy. That's my daddy and my uncles. A little boy stood in the doorway. His hands held various pieces of electrical equipment and tools. Is that right? I replied with a smile. And who are you? I'm Jesse, he replied, wiping his hand on his shirt and extending it. It's very nice to meet you, mister. I shook his hand with a mixture of curiosity and pride. It is very nice to meet you, Jesse. How old are you? I am 6 years old, sir, he replied as he placed all the things he was carrying in the coffee table. Then he walked toward the picture of my parents' wedding photo. This is my grandpa and my grandma. Yeah? I think I have met them once or twice before. I laughed. Pointing at the picture I had been looking at, I continued. Who is who in the photo with your daddy? That one is my Uncle Angel. He pointed at my brother. This one is my Uncle Damien. I have not met him. He went away before I was born. Where do you think he went? I took a seat and gestured for the boy to join me. He happily obliged. He went away to the war to fight bad guys. He solemnly said, "He is a hero." He is. I replied, "What makes you say he is a hero?" Because there are a lot of people that are scared to go to war. And he went to war to kill bad people that want to do bad things. My mommy says he went there so that me and my cousins can grow up and not have to be afraid. And what does your daddy say? He just gets really sad because he can't see his brother. The little boy looked at the doorway just as a woman walked into the house. That is my mommy. Isn't she pretty? Yes, she is, I said. How are you, ma'am? Hi, she replied. I hope the little one hasn't been much of a bother. Not at all, I replied. Your husband is in the kitchen attempting to make a Bloody Mary. Young Jesse here has been keeping me company. I should go help him, she replied. Jesse, come help daddy. It's okay, I replied. I am enjoying his company very much. He looked at me with a smile. Please, he can keep an eye on me while you try to salvage your kitchen. She laughed at my comment before leaving the room. Jesse joined me on the couch again. What is your name, mister? You don't know? I looked at him with curiosity. I'll tell you my name if you promise to keep it a secret. Okay, he eagerly replied. I'll pinky promise. You know that a pinky promise means that if you lie and break your promise, I get to keep your pinky, right? He pulled his hand away and looked at his finger, for a second debating with himself if the promise was worth keeping. Then I'll be really careful not to break my promise. I stretched my own pinky and a solemn pact was created. Okay, I said, grabbing the picture I pointed at my younger self. It took him less than a second to realize what I had just said. To his credit, he quietly jumped into my lap before clutching me in a curiously strong embrace. Soft tears fell from his eyes. My own eyes became misty. Jesse. The woman's voice interrupted our embrace. Both Jesse and I laughed for a second. I could see concern in her face. It's okay. Caesar's voice following her. You just couldn't wait, could you? He said this last part as he looked at me. I guiltily looked at my older brother and placed his son upon my lap. Regardless of my position within the family, there has always been a rule of nature. The younger brother will always bend to the older brother. It is just a matter of respect. I just don't want Jesse bothering your guest, she said with a small undertone of fear and concern. Laura, Caesar interrupted. This is my brother, Damien. Her mouth fell open. Jessie giggled in my lap. Her eyes darted from my brother to me. It was at that instant that she saw the picture that I was holding in my hands. It is a pleasure to meet you, sister. I stood and stretched my hand. She pushed it away and hugged me. There was love and complete acceptance in that embrace. Damien, she replied. Her own tears flowed. I have been dying to meet you. I have heard so much about you. I know, I replied. Jesse here has been more than candid about everything you have told him about me. I reached out and grabbed the glass that my brother offered me. I am glad people think kindly of me. Thank you. I lifted my glass to her and took a sip. I am afraid that I have come here for business with my brother. We'll speak in a little bit, but if you don't mind, my brother and I will step outside for a few minutes. Sweetheart, Caesar said, could you make Dee some breakfast, please? The fool hasn't eaten yet, and he insists on drinking this early in the morning. I didn't hear you stopping me, I replied. In fact, you almost threw the drink at me. We all laughed at the exchange, just as Laura reached her hand out to take Jesse with her. Let's go make Uncle D some food, okay? She told the boy. Him and Daddy have to talk, so let's leave them alone for a minute. But I want to be with Uncle D, Jesse whined. I'm not going away, buddy. I kneeled down to speak with him. I'll be right outside. Okay. Okay, he said, pouting in the same way that a certain woman that was still sleeping in the house did. But don't go away again, okay? Okay, I said just before I stood. Caesar walked outside. I followed him. I think I know why you are here, little brother, he said as soon as the door was closed behind us. I did not make a stake in the family business. This house was given to me fair and square, but we will leave from here if that is what you want. What are you talking about? Well, he said, I had heard you took the seat as the head of the family. I am sure that by now you know that you and I do not share the same father. So if you are here to tell me to leave this house that I have cared for throughout these years, all I ask for is time to do so. Without warning, I slapped him across the face. The old lady that just a few minutes ago had been sweeping the street, picked up her broom, and made her way to her own home. Just as Caesar recovered, I drew my pistol out and pointed it at his head, making sure that the barrel of my weapon pressed harshly into his forehead. Then maybe I should just kill you here and now? Kill that wife of yours, Make that boy of yours into my servant, because at least he shares some of my blood." I pulled the charging handle of my weapon before returning it to Caesar's forehead, pressing it harder into his skull. "Maybe I'll take her as my personal hooker, make her do the most degrading things that my sick and twisted mind can come up with." Gently, I pulled the trigger. A soft clank noise revealed that the weapon would not fire. It is a common flaw. When the barrel of a semi-automatic pistol is pressed firmly against an object, the charging handle cannot properly slide back in order to give the firing pin enough room to cause the projectile to launch. However, as the hammer is controlled primarily by the trigger itself, it would still fall, but without a projectile to ignite, it would harmlessly produce a clinking noise. "What the hell?" Caesar screamed as he realized that he was safe. He moved away and stomped the ground as I stood and laughed at him. "You're an idiot," I replied as I ejected the chambered round from the weapon. "Why in the hell would I tell my brother to leave our family home?" In a practiced move, I caught the round in the air, ejected the magazine, and replaced the round into it. Another round had already taken its place in the chamber. "You mean that you're not here to tell me to leave?" "Again," I replied as I put my weapon into its holster. "You're an idiot. You're my brother. That wife of yours is my sister. Your son is like my own. Why would you expect me to do such awful things? I just thought that once you found out that your father was not my father, well..." Tears filled his eyes. "Our mother's actions do not affect our lives, brother." I moved toward him and continued, "I am here to offer you a job." "I'll take it," he immediately replied. "Don't you want to know what it is that I will be asking you to do?" "Why would I need to know that?" He replied, "If you aren't here to do me or my family harm, why would I need to question you?" I hugged my brother then. I had been dreading that this meeting would not go this well. I was thankful that for the first time in my life, I had been horribly wrong. "You're going to need to finish your bar exam. I'll pay for whatever it is that you will need to pass it." "I don't need much more," he replied. "It's just a matter of the fees for the test." I had to take a break and work a few more hours to put food in the table for my family. Here, I drew a card from my pocket and quickly scribbled a number in it. "This is Francisco, my head of security. You call him, tell him what it is that you need, he will get it for you. Finish your test. My family will not go hungry so long as I am around." "Thank you, brother," he replied. "This is more than I could ask for." "I need you to finish your degree quickly," I replied. "We have to get Angel out as soon as possible. Now, let's go inside and eat. We still have some more to discuss, and your wife and kid will have some say in it." The modest feast that awaited us inside warmed my heart. All of my favorite foods were present. I took a seat on the side of the table, even as my brother insisted that I take the position of honor. "This is your home, brother," I replied to his protests. "I am blessed just to have a seat in which to share such a fabulous meal with such amazing people." We started eating and laughing as if years of pain and anguish did not separate us from past and present. "I'm really excited to get into cosmetology school," Laura said. "I want to work with cancer patients, help them look beautiful, help raise their spirits." "Why aren't you doing that?" I replied as I pushed the empty plate away from me. I had my fill of both laughter and food. "Oh," she replied, "it's just a dream of mine. I am far too busy dealing with the little demon here." For a second, I cringed at the name, but I hid it well enough from her. "It's a beautiful dream," I replied. "It should be pursued. Once things turn around," she replied as she reached for Caesar's hand. Seeking comfort and understanding, "I'll be able to do it." For the second time in that day, I reached into my pocket and drew another card. Jotting down a number, I handed it to Laura. "This is Edith's number, you call her. Tell her that you want to do that school. She'll take care of the rest." She looked at me in complete shock. "Please, follow your dream. It truly is beautiful." Laura looked at Caesar. A small nod from him allowed her smile to cover her face, her arms again wrapping themselves around me. "Thank you, Dee. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll make you proud." She kissed me on the cheek before she walked away toward the phone. Her face was glowing. "I think Mommy likes you," my nephew said. "I like you too, Uncle D." "Well, I'm glad you do," I laughed. "Now go play with your toys, boy. Daddy and I have one more thing to talk about before I have to leave, okay?" "Are you going away forever again?" he asked, tears swelling in his eyes. "No," I laughed. "I just have to go to work. You'll visit me soon, okay?" He laughed as he hugged me. He also made his way out of the room. "I need a favor from you, brother." "Anything," he replied without hesitation. "I need you and your family to be at our parents' house tonight at 6, I replied. "It is very important for me that you guys be there." "I don't think he wants to see me," he replied. "But if you ask me to be there, you know I will." He wants to see you, I replied. He just doesn't know how to reach out to do so. Okay, D, he replied. We'll be there. What do you need us to bring? Nothing, I replied. I'll make all the preparations. Call Francisco. I have to make another visit. I stood up from the table just as Laura walked into the room. Oh my God, D, she said as she hugged me yet again. I just talked to Edith. She is such a sweetheart. I told her who I was and what I wanted. She got me into school immediately. I start in a few days. I'm glad, baby, Caesar said. You deserve it. Are you leaving, D? She looked at me. Yes, I replied. I have to make another stop, but I'll see you guys tonight. I am glad Edith was able to help you out. She was a little mean at first, Laura confessed. But as soon as I told her who I was, she was a sweetheart. Oh, she asked me to tell you she has more numbers to run by you when you get back. Okay, I replied with a laugh. Thank you. Both of them walked me to the door. A young man jumped into my arms just before I left. Where are you going, Uncle D? I have to go visit another friend, I said. Ask your daddy what you'll be doing tonight, okay? As I placed him down, the smile that appeared on his face as soon as he learned that he would be visiting my parents was priceless. I hopped into the truck and lit a cigarette. I knew that my next stop would not be as pleasant as this one. The apartment complex was shady. There really was no other way to describe it. Slowly, I made my way to the apartment. I knocked on the door a few times and gave up after getting no answer. The lady is still working, an older man replied. He was sitting outside what I assumed was his own apartment, smoking from a pipe. If you're looking to collect some bill, she won't be back for a while. No, old man, I replied. I am not a bill collector. Where is she working? Why would I tell you? What, are you a cop or something? I've been accused of being a lot of things, I laughed. Never of being a cop. I walked up to him and asked him for a light with which to light my cigarette. Well, you look like a cop, he replied, laughing to himself. Damn mud puppy. No, sir, I replied. I knew what he was referring to. Military police were often called mud puppies because of their acronym, and P. It was from a long time ago and it stuck. Paratrooper, all around? Yeah. He smiled a little at my revelation. I was with the old Easy Company, 1st and the 507th. I was with 1st Ranger Bat, I replied. Grunt document? I'll be damned, Doc, he replied. A sudden youth returned to his voice. She'll be down at the laundromat. She runs that place sometimes. Death from above, old man, I said as I walked away. Down to earth, Doc, he replied. I like this old man. The laundromat was not difficult to find. I walked in and immediately spotted her. She was hovering above a laptop. Her belt was adorned with containers filled with quarters. The place was full. A small group of guys was lingering close to her, making small remarks about her. She was ignoring them, but I knew how much they bothered her. At least I assumed they did. Come on, baby, one of them said. I'll show you what a real man feels like. Stop being all frosty, another one said. You gonna end up alone like that? The entire group laughed. If you aren't here to do laundry, then you need to leave, she said as the group laughed even louder. What are you going to do, baby? Kick us out? The first one spoke. Call the cops. This last comment brought laughter from the entire group. He stood up and walked toward her. You know you want it. It's been long since you last had some. We're just offering to give you a good time. No need to turn into a bitch about it. Ma'am, I said, can I speak to you for a second? Can't you see the lady is busy, the guy said. He took a defiant step toward me. Walk away, little man. Or, I answered. He got closer to me, closing the distance between us. This was his first mistake. Or, I break your face, little man, he responded. This was his second mistake. With my left hand, I pulled the back of his head forward. Immediately, I drove my left knee into his face. The sound of his nose breaking was sickening, but it served as a signal for his buddies to stand up. The one that had spoken as well tried to tackle me. I simply stepped to the side and tripped him. Luckily, his face broke his fall. You must really want to die, a third man said as he stood in front of me. This one knew what he was doing. He carefully kept his distance from me. His arms drawn up and protected his face and body. Some boxing background, surely. He threw a right hook to my body. I gently stepped back and launched a straight punch of my own. Mine connected with his right eye, immediately closing it from the swelling. As his hands moved to protect the recently hurt area, his body became unguarded. I delivered an elbow to the solar plexus that immediately brought him to his knees. You're gonna die, now, the fourth man said as he too tried to tackle me. This time I delivered a swift kick to the face. A shower of teeth ensured that I was successful in hitting the right spot. Only one more stood. As we made eye contact, he reached into his jacket and drew a small pistol. My instinct took over. Pulling the pistol upward, I made sure that his fingers were broken. Drawing it downward, I placed special care in his wrist. A left elbow to the face made sure that his face would feel just as bad as his hand. Anyone else? I asked aloud. The people in the laundromat continued their business as I broke the weapon apart and placed the lower receiver into my pocket. Can we speak now? Yeah, sure, she replied, fear in her voice. I'm not going to hurt you, I replied. No one is going to hurt you. I'm a friend of Francisco. You can call him if you'd like. I think I should, she replied, reaching into her pocket and drawing out a cell phone. What is your name? Just describe me to him, I replied. He'll tell you my name. The phone call was quick. I could hear her description, then her face went into shock and surprise. While she was on the phone, the men picked themselves up and made a quick retreat from the place. When she hung up the phone, she walked up to me and slapped me. Your brother got my husband killed, she said amidst tears and anguish. It's all your brother's fault that I am alone. She continued her barrage by punching me repeatedly in the chest, tears flowing from her eyes. I hate you all. I know, I replied. You have every right to. I allowed her to continue her abuse. Please, I continued. Listen to me, Anis. No, she replied. Why the hell should I listen to you people? Because I am here to help you, I replied. Your husband gave his life trying to protect my brother. That is not something that I would forget, and I am here to offer myself as your servant in payment for your loss. I dropped to my knees as I continued. Ask for me anything, and it will be done. Anything? If it's within my power, you will have it. What if I ask you to kill yourself? I drew my weapon out and swiftly placed it on the side of my head. All you have to do is ask. Her hand moved the weapon away from my head. It wouldn't bring him back, she replied. No, I answered. But if it will make you feel better, then I will do it. I would do anything for you. Why? Because your family shed blood for mine, I replied. It is only fair that my family do the same for yours. If your husband was alive today, I would call him brother for spilling blood on our behalf. Therefore, I will call you sister and look after you as he would have wanted. She began to cry more openly. All the pain she had held onto was openly flowing from her body. Did Francisco tell you who I am? Yes, she replied. You're the demon. I am, I replied. And like I said, you are now my family. You are welcome into our home whenever you would like to visit. Please, let me look after you. Thank you, she replied. Life has been hard. It won't get any easier, I replied. But I promise you, you will always have someone to rely on in the darkest nights. Now, let's get your things. You won't live here anymore. I can't have that. Okay, she replied. I thought I was all alone. I have no one. Not anymore, I replied. You have sisters to meet, brothers to annoy, little cousins to raise. You will never be alone, ever again. We quietly walked to her apartment. I helped her pack her meager belongings. The old man smiled at me as we walked away. Doc never stands taller than when he kneels to save the wounded, he said as we walked away from that horrid place. It's almost time, sir, Francisco said. Are you sure you want to go at it alone? I have to, I replied. He won't try anything. He is a man of his word. I need a favor, though. Anything, boss, Francisco replied. Go down to the pound, I replied. Find a dog that would be suitable for my father. He needs a companion, something to keep him going in life. Any particular breed? Pitbull, I replied. They are as loyal as we are. Just as dumb too, I replied with a laugh. Sir, he said, I wanted to thank you for bringing Anais here. I have been trying to look after her. But? Don't mention it, I replied. It was the right thing to do. She will be well looked after for here. Still, he continued, you didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, I replied. Family has to be the most important thing. There is not much loyalty in this world, my friend. When you find someone loyal, you hold on to them. There is no greater mark of loyalty than shedding blood for someone else. Always remember that, my friend. I will, he replied. Still, thank you. Go find my dad a dog, I replied. Watch the house while I am away. Especially Edith. She has a tendency to get into trouble at the most inappropriate of times. Yes, sir, he replied. I am taking Jessica with me. She is awfully green. There is a lot of training to get her through before she is ready to protect anyone. Do what you need to, I replied. If there are any issues, let me know. I thought you said we would be alone, I said as I looked over the grill at the two walking figures. No, Elvis replied. I told you to be alone. I never said anything about me being alone as well. Besides, this here is my partner. Davis, this is D. Beer is in the cooler, I replied. Help yourself. There's an awful lot of people here for you being alone, Davis said. His face was expressionless, but the tone of his voice betrayed the annoyance that he was feeling. It's funny, I replied. I was thinking the same thing. You wanted Dee's kitchen. This is how Dee's kitchen works. It's fine, Elvis replied. We won't be here long anyway. Just wanted to know why you were here in town. You are making an awful lot of people nervous. Yeah, about that, I replied. Why does the CIA care so much about what a private citizen does? We care when a highly trained private citizen such as yourself decides to join a large criminal enterprise and begins to make moves within the community, Davis said. And because of that private citizen, I have to spend my time in this piece of shit town, talking to a piece of shit person that clearly has forgotten what it means to be a patriot. D. Elvis interrupted. The FBI is currently looking at a few of the organizations in this place. You know this is a huge corridor for illegal weapons and drugs flowing into the country. Hell, your brother is in jail right now because of gun trafficking. As soon as your name came up, well, the FBI reached out and brought me in as a consultant. That is funny, I replied as I laughed. We both know that my brother was set up. If you had taken the time to look into the flimsy case, well, you would know that as well. I took a sip from my beer before continuing. Did they bring you in because of our shared past? Yeah, Elvis replied. Even if your brother was set up, D, someone has to go down for that. There are a lot of weapons in the streets that don't need to be there. Don't get me wrong. It makes me happy to read when scum kills each other, but more and more innocent people are getting caught in the middle. So, I'll ask you, man to man, brother to brother, why are you here? Do you know where they are keeping my brother? I looked at Elvis. Your so-called patriots won't tell us anything about it. Just answer the question, a-hole, Davis said. Or maybe we should take that young woman you keep around, Edith, and ask her. He didn't even have time to react to the punch that struck the side of his face. Immediately his body went limp as he fell to the ground unconscious. Yeah, Elvis said as he looked at his partner. He did have that one coming. Your brother is in one of the federal facilities in New Mexico. We are looking after him now. After your talk with Officer Sandoval, people started looking more and more closely at your brother's case. You are right. There is a lot of evidence that could be construed to support the theory that there was a setup. But D, your brother is almost as stubborn as you are. He won't tell us anything, and like I said, someone has to go down for it. The Sleeping Beauty is waking up, I said as Davis began to stir. If there is nothing else, Elvis, then I guess we got nothing more to say. D, he reached down to help his partner stand. I don't want to go to war against you, but if you are on the wrong side of the law, there will be no other way around it. I will take you down. And I will take you down hard. You'll try, I replied. You know, people always wondered who between us is better. They actually used to cover our stats and argue about it constantly. Yeah, Elvis replied as he began to walk away. And who do you think is better, D? You or me? I wasn't the one that broke out in tears after 6 days in the cage, I answered. This was one of our many shared memories. We were taking part in the military's version of interrogation resistance training. One of their more particularly brutal exercises was called the cage. It was a small cell small enough for one person to be placed with no room to move. The height of the cell was short enough that you had to crouch in order to avoid hitting the top part of the cage. Yet the walls were so close that you could not sit or even lay on the ground. No, he coldly replied. And I wasn't the one that needed rescuing when my team was ambushed. He was referring to a time in Iraq when that very thing had happened to my team. 3 of us had gone into a small complex in order to apprehend a high-ranking clergy member in the city. The villagers ambushed us just as we were leaving the complex. They wanted to kill this man, and there was nothing that we could do to prevent it from happening except try to speed away. We almost did too, but an IED flipped our vehicle. We held our own until a small group of operators that had been tasked to a nearby area provided us with relief. Good times, I replied. Our mutual psychological gameplay was still as sharp as I had remembered it being. Make sure Snow White there gets a cold pack on that jaw. Some Midol will help him out too. Elvis laughed at my comment. I'll see you around, Elvis. If I want you to, he replied. You will, D. How did it go? My father sat in the table as he watched my nephew and his new dog playing in the backyard. Again, my father's face held a smile, the thing that he had been missing for a long time. As well as it could have, I replied. What did you name him? I think your brother named him Jesse. He laughed. The dog is Document. That's a good name, I replied. The meaning of the name more than obvious. Have you spoken with Caesar yet? Yup, he replied. How did that go? As well as it could have, he replied. Did you learn anything from that friend of yours? Angel is in New Mexico in one of the federal buildings, I replied. CIA is watching him. They are trying to get him to be more cooperative in their investigation. Might have better luck squeezing water from a rock, he said. I don't know who is more stubborn between you two. That's what he said as well, I replied. Pops, I'm gonna need that back room of yours. And I'm gonna need you to patch things up with Caesar and Mother. They're going to be staying here for a while. The room is ready, he replied. There is no ill will between your brother and me, son. I will be cordial with your mother, but don't ask me to be a loving husband to her. Not yet. No, Pops. I looked at him. The smile was still spread across his face. It was good to see the old man smile again. You'll be seeing a lot of CIA around the neighborhood, I continued. They'll be keeping an eye on you. Yeah, I've seen them about, he replied. Saves you from having to put some of your men here at least. Keep them close to you, son. Whatever hive you are going to put to flames next is gonna come at you fast. Gotta clear the rats out before I can build a vineyard, I replied. You taught me that. Your brother and his wife are in the room talking with your mother, he said. If you're done cooking, I would like to eat. Yes, I replied. I'll get them. As I walked away, even as this shit storm that was certainly brewing around me, I found a sense of relief. My father was once again smiling. At least I had managed to take care of that problem so that I could focus on the looming threat. Dear listeners, the next part will be out soon. In the meantime, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.